Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a lesson in which we're going to be talking about computer sabotage and basically different kinds of cybercrime. Those are collectively referred to as .cons. And this information is presented in the book on pages 358 to 371. So look in the book on those pages to basically get more information about these things. I have several different links I'll refer to as we go through this lesson. And I hope it's going to. I hope you're going to enjoy it. So let me jump over to the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's begin. Let's first start talking about computer sabotage. And anytime I get a chance to talk about the Beastie Boys, I bring them up. Love the Beastie Boys. They have a great song called Sabotage. If you've never heard it, I suggest you listen to it. In the slides, there's actually a link to a YouTube video for it. But collectively, there are a group of activities that are referred to as computer sabotage, and what those activities, they include basically your botnets, malware, denial of service, and then data program and website alteration. And so these four activities collectively, we're going to refer to those as computer sabotage. Essentially, somebody is trying to mess with your data or your equipment, and this is how they can achieve that. Let's take a look at these. Botnets are basically when your computer is used to send requests for web pages to a web server. And what happens is basically somebody gets angry at a website for some reason, or they may be a competitor and they're trying to cause problems for a website. Let's say there's the Jim Lindsay candy company and the Homer Simpson candy company, and let's say Jim Lindsay gets mad at Homer Simpson. Well, I might get my tech guys to come up with basically with software that turns a bunch of people's computers into bots, and so at a specific time and place they launch a denial of service attack. And your botnets and your denial of service, they kind of go together here, so that at a specific date and time, Homer Simpson's candy company can't actually do any business. They can't actually provide services from their web server because all these infected machines, these bots, are now they've become a botnet or a bot network, and they're just sending it requests for web pages, senseless requests for web pages, and they overwhelm that web server. And so that's one form of sabotage. How do you protect yourself from that? Well, basically, we talked about firewalls in the unauthorized access and use lesson. That's what one of the purposes of your firewall is to prevent that sort of thing from going on. So using firewalls is a way to basically help make that not happen. Interestingly enough, I basically saw I was flipping through channels about a year ago, and it's cable, and so like the cable access for like the local city commission meeting came up, and here in it was Bowling Green or Warren County Fiscal Court, anyway, the city was buying insurance against denial of service attacks, and so it's something that it's gotten to the point where basically entities basically can now even buy insurance products to protect themselves against that sort of an event. And so it's really easy to protect yourself, to make it so your machine doesn't participate in that by using your firewall. Make sure your firewall is turned on, and that you're using your Windows updates or your Apple updates to make sure that your software is current. So that's one. There's a couple of things covered right there. Next, it talks about malware, and that's basically two words smushed together. It's malicious software. So you take malicious and software, smush them together, you get malware. And viruses, worms, Trojan horses, mobile malware, those are all different software programs which basically are trying to either get information about you from your machine, or they're just trying to damage information. Most of the times this stuff is created by young people At least historically, that's the way it's been. But what's nice about this stuff is basically the solution to protect yourself is the same. You want to get anti-malware software, and that's going to be like Symantec's, Norton products, or McAfee products, or even built into the operating system of like Windows now. There's Windows Defender, and it does a great job. You have free products like AVG. You have scores and scores of anti-malware software that you can get, and some of it is free. And what it does is it basically it gets updated pretty much every day, and it's monitoring what's going on with your computer, and it's looking for signatures of malicious activity. And if that happens, it will quarantine files that it thinks are malicious. It can delete things. It can basically protect you from losing data due to an infection from malware. So that's one of the good points about malware. It's you just have to be vigilant and make sure that you have antivirus software, and that is up to date. And because it's if you have a Windows machine, there is no reason. If you have Windows 10 or Windows 7, there's no reason you shouldn't just turn it on and let it do its thing. You only want one of these running. If you have the Windows Defender program running, then you don't need McAfee. You don't need Norton. If you have more than one anti-malware software running, they typically will think the other one is something bad. So, and firewalls too. You typically only want one firewall running. So choose what you want, whether it's McAfee or Norton or Windows, and then turn that on and let it do its thing. If you have an Apple computer, you still need anti-malware software. There are viruses for Macs. It's just most of the time when people write viruses and write malware, they're typically going for as many infections as they can get. And because the Windows market is still bigger than the Apple market, they typically infect Windows machines more than they do Apple machines. But Apple has enjoyed more and more market share every year for quite a while, and they are susceptible to viruses just like PCs. So if you didn't know that, I would recommend to you to get anti-malware software. And Norton makes a product. I think it's probably $45. It's not cheap, but it's worth it, because if your machine gets infected and you lose your data, then your machine becomes worthless. Great. Okay, last point on this. Basically, our smartphones, our mobile devices, are also being targeted by malware now. And one of the interesting facts in your book, it talks about, it's on page 361, it talks about a Symantec. Symantec is the company that makes Norton antivirus. It basically, Symantec found that 17% of all Android apps were actually malware in disguise, and what they're trying to do is find your banking data, primarily with the mobile malware. So, making sure that you're, be careful what you put on your phone. Make sure you're doing updates to your phone. One of the key things you can do for in addition to having antivirus software is also make sure you're updating your software. So if you get a notification, hey, do a Windows update, do a Mac OS update, do an Office update, do the updates, because this type of malware, the worm, is basically, it takes advantage of those vulnerabilities that exist in software. If you're updating every time the updates come out, you'll typically stay in front of that sort of infection. So having your firewall turned on, having antivirus software, doing your updates, if you take care of those things, these sorts of problems should be very much as minimized as you can minimize them. Okay, well, let's change gears. Let's jump back to about page 364, and it gets into a collection of cybercrime activities, and collectively it's going to call these .cons. And what it gets into first is it starts talking about identity theft, and I'm sure you are familiar with that. You probably know somebody that has experienced that. It's essentially when somebody else tries to they get information about you and then poses you primarily to steal money from you. They may buy things online. They may open up, accounts, bank accounts, and then start spending money that that you then become potentially responsible for because they used your identity to do it. And so that's what identity theft is. What I would ask you to do is look over. I'm going to jump over to the Blackboard site real fast. Is that it? On the Blackboard site, I have some links down here at the bottom of this page talking about identity theft insurance. And I have a couple of different point of views presented, basically one that says, hey, you don't need this because you can do this stuff yourself. And another that says, hey, you should get this because, nobody does this for themselves. And then some reviews here. And so I encourage you to take a look at those. That's basically an insurance product which, if you experience identity theft, these kinds of products can help you basically recover as quicker and with less headache. They don't prevent you from experiencing identity theft. It's just like having auto insurance. Just because you have auto insurance doesn't mean you're not going to have a car wreck. But if you have a car wreck, then like once you pay your deductible, then guess what? Then the auto insurance kicks in and it fixes the rest of the car for you. So take a look at those articles. I encourage you to look at those. Think about, is this something that you would invest in? I know as a college student you might not be in a position where you have a lot of money right now, but once you get a job and you're working, this might be something you may want to consider. So put those out there for your consideration. Now, also introduced in this chapter, it talks about a specific type of scam .con, which is called spear phishing. I'm sure you know what phishing is. Phishing has been around a long time. Phishing is basically when you get a scam email and somebody in that email, they have things like a link that you click on and you think you're going to the Bank of California website or the PayPal website or the U.S. U.S. Bank website, but in fact you're actually going to their website, and then you put your login information in there, and then as a result of that, people steal from you. Most people are pretty savvy against those sorts of scams now, but there's one called spear phishing, which is basically an evolution of this that is really insidious. And the reason that spear phishing is so much more insidious is basically hackers have, they will breach a database of user information, and then based on what that information that they've gotten from the, like let's say, let me give you a specific example. The Office of Personnel Management. Let me jump over to Blackboard here. If you look at this ARS Technica article right here, it looks like this. This is not new. This is from 2015, but the training that went out as a result of this was really good training. And the Office of Personnel Management, which is basically like the human resource function of the federal government, their database was breached. Hackers got in there and got information about people that work for the federal government. And then as a result of that, people started getting these spear phishing emails. And so if you look at this other link, this is called the spear phishing video. Please watch that. It's less than 3 minutes long, and the information that you see in there is really good. It's basically saying, if you get an email from, let's say you buy things buy Christmas presents for your or holiday presents for your family from Amazon.com, and you get an email from what you think is Amazon. Well, be really careful as you look at that email because, it may not be from Amazon. Because of an Amazon breach, you might get a spear phishing email that looks like it's from Amazon. So just be really careful, and it gives you good tips in here about what to look for and how to verify that that you're actually doing business with Amazon and not a bad guy. And so that's discussed in this chapter. Let me jump back to the presentation. Okay, and I've got one last thing I wanted to recommend to you in this .con area. You've probably heard of skimmers, credit card skimmers, and what those are, they're devices that basically they affix, or they fit on top of where you would swipe a card, like like your credit card or debit card. And I have a really good video that I also wanted you. It's this credit card skimmer video, and just take a look at, start it at minute 4 through 6.5. It's about 2.5 minutes there, but it looks like this. And basically it talks about how to recognize a card skimmer, because if you've never seen one of these things, in this case, you have a blue and a yellow card card readers in here. As you go through and look at this video, the guy does a good job of basically showing you what a skimmer looks like. And I encourage you, when you go up to swipe your card, whether it's a debit card or a credit card, shake that part, grab that part where you're going to scan your swipe your card through, and shake it and see if it moves. If it moves, don't use it. Your good swiping devices are going to be solid and fixed on there. If it's a skimmer, then it's probably going to come off, or it's going to jostle around and potentially even come off for you. So I think that's a really good video for you to see. Again, just minutes 4 through 6.5, you'll see what skimmers look like. You may have a chip credit card, and this is also a link. I've got this little chip credit card article right here. I encourage you to take a look at this. If you have a chip credit card, whenever you can possibly do it, use the chip part instead of swiping with the stripe. And even on campus, you can't use the chip function. If you go to Subway, sometimes you can swipe it, sometimes you have to use, sometimes you can't. But use the chip part whenever you can, because what happens is, when you use the chip part, as this little article does, a good job explaining here, it basically sends an encrypted message back and forth for that one transaction from that card. And so it's much more secure than your regular just swipe that you use when you swipe debit cards. So whenever possible, use the chip part of your payment card if you can possibly do it. So that's a lot of information. You basically heard about the various types of malware, and you've learned about these various different sorts of .cons. The very last thing I would ask you to consider is basically this. When you are doing business, anytime you're going to put any sort of username, password, or any sort of banking or financial information, make sure that the site you're using is an HTTPS site. What that stands for is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure Version, and what that means is, when you have an HTTPS connection, your computer, as it sends packets to the web server, it encrypts the data back, so that if anybody intercepts it in the middle, they cannot read it. And so anytime you're putting username or password stuff in, make sure you're using HTTPS connection. What does that look like? Well, if we jump over to a browser and we look at a browser here, you'll see I've got HTTPS up here in the address bar for Blackboard, and I've got the little padlock saying it's secure. So that tells me that is an HTTPS connection versus a non-secure connection. Let me see if I can even find one here. Okay, I've opened up Pepsi.com, and you'll see there's no padlock up in here. This is so if I was on this page and I don't see the HTTPS up here and I don't see a little padlock, this is a page where I would not want to put in any kind of sensitive information. You for sure want to have that padlock in place. Now, the other reason I bring this to your attention is that as a business owner or as a supervisor of a business, you should make sure that your web pages are hosted with secure hosting. So make sure when you put a website out, if you're going to do anything, if all you're going to do is just display static information like that Pepsi page where they're just talking about, hey, here's the new flavor of Pepsi. If it's just information you're presenting, that's fine. HTTP is fine. But if you're going to be collecting username and password or anything like that, make sure that you're you're paying the additional money that's required to get an HTTPS connection. I have a link. The last link I have to share with you here is from that Blackboard site. Basically, is for secure hosting. You'll see that at GoDaddy, who is a web host, if you're just going to secure like one website, it's about $60 additional per year, and that's cheap. You know, just think it. Would your customers come back if they did business with you and then experience identity theft as a result? No, of course not. They wouldn't come back. So that's $60 a year in addition to your regular hosting fees. That's well worth it. So that's the information that's presented in this chapter, or in this section of the chapter. I hope that I hope you find it interesting, and thanks for your time and attention.